Halloween was always a big deal for our family. The kids loved it, my wife Lisa, too. This year, though, felt a little different, maybe because we were headed to my brother Jake's house, which didn't sit right with me. Jake had just split from his girlfriend, Marie, not even a month ago. But Lisa had been the one pushing hard for us to go, saying the kids were excited to see their uncle. I wasn't sure why she was so insistent. Jake was still moping around after the breakup, and I didn't think he'd be much fun, but Lisa acted like it was crucial we all showed up. She had been bringing him up more than usual lately, how he needed family around him, how we should make sure he wasn't alone. Honestly, her concern for my brother was strange. They'd always gotten along, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. But I brushed it aside, thinking I was overanalyzing things. Maybe it was just the stress of work piling up on me. The kids, meanwhile, were all excited, especially our eldest, Ryan. He had been talking about his costume for weeks. A teenager now, he was growing more independent, and it hit me that this would probably be one of the last Halloweens where he'd want to tag along with us instead of his friends. His younger brother, Josh, was full of energy, running around the house while Lisa put the final touches on her witch costume. She looked great, but I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. Maybe it was because, lately, things had felt different between us. Little things like her being overly protective of her phone, her becoming distant, and, well, less engaged. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase, that I was imagining things. As we loaded into the car and headed to Jake's, Lisa was unusually quiet, staring out the window as if lost in thought. I chalked it up to her worrying about Jake's state of mind. The drive was mostly quiet except for the boys in the back, excitedly chatting about the night's plans. Lisa, though, barely said a word. I glanced over at her a few times, but she avoided my eyes, which wasn't like her. We arrived at Jake's place, and I noticed Lisa perked up. She greeted Jake with an enthusiasm that surprised me, almost as if she hadn't seen him in years. Jake seemed happier than I expected, like his breakup wasn't bothering him at all. His mood was light, and he even joked around with the boys, handing out candy before we all settled in for the evening. As the kids ran off to explore the neighborhood for candy, I hung back with Jake, sharing a beer on his porch. Everything seemed normal enough on the surface, but a lingering discomfort kept tugging at me. I hadn't seen Jake this cheerful in a long time, and it didn't make sense. His girlfriend had just left him. Shouldn't he still be down in the dumps? Then I noticed Lisa slipping back inside the house, heading towards the kitchen. She didn't call me to join her, but I followed after a few minutes, trying to shake the suspicion gnawing at the back of my mind. When I entered the kitchen, she was there, casually chatting with Jake as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I knew I was being irrational. Jake was my brother, and Lisa loved me. There was no reason to doubt either of them. But the way she laughed a little too easily at something he said, or how she touched his arm lightly, made me pause. I told myself it was nothing, just me being paranoid. Still, the nagging thought wouldn't go away. "Everything all right?" I asked, stepping closer, trying to sound casual. Lisa smiled. "Yeah, just talking with Jake. You good?" "Yeah, just checking in," I replied, but my eyes met Jake's, and for a second, something unspoken passed between us, something I couldn't quite place but left me feeling cold. After a while, the night continued as expected. We took the kids trick-or-treating, joked around, and eventually headed home, but that strange sense of unease stuck with me long after we pulled out of Jake's driveway. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks after a long day. But deep down, I knew better. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next few days passed without much happening, but that night at Jake's lingered in my mind. I tried not to dwell on it, but little things started to pile up. Lisa seemed unusually eager to bring Jake into conversations, asking how he was doing, wondering if we should invite him over more often. I tried to brush it off as her being concerned for him, but the more I thought about it, the more it didn't sit right with me. Jake had never been the type to need anyone's pity. He was the tough, independent one, always shrugging off problems like they didn't matter. But now, Lisa acted like he was some wounded bird who needed constant attention. One afternoon, Lisa came up to me, holding her phone, with a casual smile that felt forced. I was thinking, she started, glancing at her screen. We should go visit Jake this weekend. You know, check in on him. I frowned. We were just there on Halloween. You think he really needs us again already? She hesitated, then shrugged. Yeah, maybe. I just feel like he could use the company. Besides, the kids love going there, and I think it's good for Jake to have family around right now. It wasn't a bad idea on the surface, but something in her tone didn't feel right. She was pushing too hard, almost like she had a personal stake in it. I brushed off the growing suspicion and agreed, figuring it'd be nice for the boys to see their uncle again. The weekend came, and we headed over to Jake's house, the same strange feeling creeping in as we pulled into his driveway. Jake greeted us with that same overly happy demeanor, which I still found odd, but this time, I couldn't help but notice how Lisa seemed comfortable. A little too comfortable. She disappeared inside the house with Jake, leaving me with the kids in the yard. As the boys ran around, I stayed behind, trying to make sense of what was going on. I could hear Lisa and Jake's muffled laughter from inside, but every time I tried to shake off the unease, it came back stronger. What were they talking about that I wasn't a part of? By the time we left, that weird tension was still hanging over everything. On the drive home, Lisa's mood was brighter than it had been in weeks. The tension between us was gone, but not in the way I'd hoped. She seemed relieved, like a weight had been lifted. I was happy that she seemed in better spirits, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling that something was going on, something I wasn't a part of. It wasn't long before Lisa started making excuses to visit Jake more often. He's lonely, she said. He needs us. But it wasn't us she was really talking about, was it? I'd catch her messaging him sometimes, always with some excuse about checking in or asking how he was. I tried to let it go, convinced myself that she was just being a good sister-in-law, but deep down, the doubts were growing. A few weeks later, I overheard Ryan, our eldest, talking to Lisa about something odd. I was in the kitchen grabbing a drink when their conversation caught my attention. Ryan was saying something about being over near Jake's place with some friends and seeing something strange. Yeah, I saw your car there, Mom, Ryan said casually, his voice a mix of curiosity and confusion. Lisa froze. When was this? She asked, her tone careful, maybe too careful. A few days ago. I thought maybe you were just dropping something off, but I didn't see you. The car was there for a while, though. There was a long pause, and I could feel the tension building from where I stood, out of sight but listening intently. Oh yeah, Lisa finally said, her voice light, like it wasn't a big deal. I must have been helping Jake with something. She quickly changed the subject, and Ryan, being a teenager, didn't seem to think much of it. But I did. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what Ryan had said. Why hadn't Lisa told me she'd been at Jake's alone? It wasn't like her to leave something like that out. I asked her about it before bed, trying to sound casual. You were over at Jake's the other day? I asked, pretending it wasn't a big deal, though every part of me was waiting for her answer. She looked up from her book, clearly caught off guard. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention. I was helping him with a few things around the house. Nothing major. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, not pressing further, but I could feel my heart sinking. Lisa never forgot things like that. I didn't want to be suspicious. I wanted to believe her, but the pieces weren't adding up. She'd been at Jake's without telling me, and now she was trying to brush it off like it didn't matter. In bed that night, I couldn't sleep. Every moment she had been distant, every laugh she shared with Jake, all of it came crashing down on me, building into something I couldn't ignore. Lisa's late-night texts, her eagerness to visit Jake, her silence when I asked about it, it was all starting to form a picture, and I didn't like what I was seeing. The cracks were forming, and I didn't know how to stop them from growing. I tried to put it out of my mind, really. After all, Lisa was my wife, and Jake was my brother. I shouldn't have to feel this way about either of them. But Ryan's offhand comment stuck with me, nagging at the back of my brain like an itch I couldn't scratch. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe Lisa had genuinely forgotten to mention her visit to Jake's. People forget things all the time, right? A few days passed, and the tension in the air was palpable, though I couldn't quite figure out why. Lisa was acting normal, too normal actually. She was attentive, playful with the kids, and making an effort to spend more time with me. Yet, underneath it all, I could sense something off. It was like she was overcompensating, trying too hard to show that everything was fine. It only made me more suspicious. Then came the day that shifted everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Ryan had just gotten home from school. He was barely through the door before I heard him calling out, his voice tinged with something between excitement and concern. "Dad, you're not gonna believe what I saw!" he yelled, dropping his backpack by the door. I walked over, confused by his tone. "What's up?" I asked, trying to match his energy. "I was driving back from Tim's place, and I saw Mom's car," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It was parked at Uncle Jake's house again." My stomach dropped. "Again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "When was this?" Ryan shrugged. "Like an hour ago, I guess? I didn't see her or anything, but her car was parked out front, same as last time. Is she helping him with something?" I stared at Ryan, my mind racing. She hadn't mentioned going to Jake's today, hadn't even hinted at it. And why would she go without telling me? My pulse quickened, and that familiar feeling of dread crept in again, stronger than ever. "Yeah," I finally said, forcing a casual tone. "I think she's just helping him out with some stuff." Ryan didn't seem to think much of it, and wandered off to his room, but I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. Lisa's car at Jake's house, again. I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. Something was wrong. I grabbed my phone and debated what to do. Should I call her? Ask her outright where she was? But what if she lied? I decided to wait. If Ryan had seen her car there an hour ago, she'd be home soon. I wanted to hear what she'd say without being prompted. But every minute that passed felt like an eternity. I paced around the house, unable to sit still, the weight of my suspicions growing heavier with each passing second. Finally, just after 6 p.m., Lisa walked through the door, her face flushed as if she'd been rushing. She gave me a quick smile as she slipped off her shoes and dropped her keys on the kitchen counter. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too cheerful. "How was your day?" I watched her carefully, trying to read her expression. "Good," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "How about you? Where were you?" Lisa hesitated for the briefest moment, and I saw it, the flicker of something in her eyes, something like panic before she quickly masked it with a smile. "Oh, just running some errands," she said lightly, heading toward the fridge. "Nothing exciting." I felt a lump forming in my throat, the lies twisting in the air between us. "Ryan said he saw your car at Jake's earlier." Lisa froze, her hands still gripping the fridge door handle. It was subtle, but I saw it, a moment of hesitation before she composed herself. "Oh yeah," she said, turning to face me. "I stopped by for a minute to drop off some stuff Jake needed. It wasn't a big deal, so I didn't think to mention it." I stared at her, my mind racing with 100 questions. Why hadn't she told me? Why was she lying? Or maybe it wasn't a lie, maybe she really had just dropped something off. But the nagging suspicion in my gut told me otherwise. I decided not to push it further, at least not right then. "Okay," I said, forcing a smile. "Just curious." But inside, I was anything but calm. Something was happening behind my back, and I was done ignoring it. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat in the living room with Lisa. We were watching a movie, but my mind wasn't on the screen. Every glance she made toward her phone, every time she shifted in her seat, my mind spiraled deeper into suspicion. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself to grab a glass of water, but instead of heading to the kitchen, I quietly slipped into our bedroom and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. My hands were shaking as I entered the passcode, She hadn't changed it, thank God. I told myself I wasn't the kind of man who snooped through his wife's things, but I needed answers. I couldn't keep living in this cloud of doubt. I scrolled through her texts, not sure what I was expecting to find. There were the usual messages between her and friends, some group chats with her coworkers, but nothing from Jake. It struck me as odd because I knew they'd been talking. I'd seen the notifications before. So where were the messages? Then it hit me, she'd deleted them. My blood ran cold. She hadn't deleted any other conversations, just the ones with Jake. Why would she do that if there was nothing to hide? I felt sick to my stomach, the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, but I couldn't stop. I opened her recent calls. Sure enough, Jake's name appeared multiple times. Not long conversations, but frequent. Every couple of days, sometimes multiple times in one day. What the hell were they talking about? I heard a sound from the living room and quickly put the phone back, my heart racing. I had seen enough to confirm what I had been dreading for weeks. Something was going on between Lisa and Jake. And the worst part was, I had no idea how deep it went. Returning to the living room, I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. Lisa smiled at me as I sat back down, completely unaware that I had just uncovered the first solid proof of her deception. I watched her, my stomach churning with a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. How long had this been going on? What had she done? And more importantly, what was I going to do next? The next few days were torture. Lisa acted as if nothing was wrong, going about her daily routine, chatting with the kids, and even making plans for the weekend. But every time I looked at her, I couldn't shake the image of her sneaking around with Jake. It was like a film playing over and over in my head, growing darker with each repetition. I couldn't let on that I knew. Not yet. I needed more. The deleted texts were a smoking gun, but I wanted to catch them in the act. I needed undeniable proof before I confronted her, so there would be no room for excuses, no way to twist the truth. The idea of confronting Jake was even more nauseating. He was my brother, someone I'd trusted all my life, but now he was sneaking around with my wife behind my back. I didn't know how to process it. The anger inside me was boiling, but I kept it contained. I had to play it smart. I wasn't going to let emotions dictate how I handled this. Then, one afternoon, Ryan came to me again. It was a normal day. He had just gotten home from hanging out with his friends, and I was working in the garage when he wandered in. "Dad," he started, leaning against the doorway. "I saw something weird again." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" He shifted awkwardly, as if he didn't want to make a big deal of it, but something had clearly bothered him. "I saw Mom's car again, near Uncle Jake's place. I wasn't even going that way, but some friends and I took a different route, and there it was, parked near his house." My throat tightened. "When was this?" "Earlier today," he said casually. "Around lunchtime, I think." Lunchtime. Lisa had told me she was out grocery shopping earlier, even sent me a picture of the cart filled with groceries. So why was her car at Jake's? I tried to stay calm, forcing a neutral tone. "Did you see her or anything?" Ryan shook his head. "No, just the car." "I don't know, maybe she was just dropping something off." "Yeah, maybe," I said, but I knew better. The pieces were falling into place, and every part of me wanted to drive over to Jake's house and confront them both right then and there. But I held back. If I went now, all I'd have is suspicions. I needed something solid. Ryan didn't seem too concerned and wandered back inside, leaving me standing alone in the garage, my mind racing. It was clear now. Lisa had been lying to me for weeks, probably longer, and Jake was in on it. But what exactly were they doing? Were they meeting secretly? Was it physical? Emotional? I felt like I was going insane, running through every possible scenario in my head. That night, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I had tried to ignore it, tried to reason with myself, but the truth was staring me in the face. Lisa and Jake were hiding something, and I was done waiting for them to slip up. I needed to know for sure, and I wasn't going to let them continue to make a fool of me. After Lisa went to bed, I stayed up, pretending to watch TV but really planning my next move. I knew Lisa had been deleting her texts with Jake, but maybe I could catch them in real time. I installed the tracking app on her phone while she slept, something I never thought I'd do, but I had reached the point where I didn't care about ethics. I needed the truth. The next day, I kept my distance, playing along with our usual routine while the app quietly monitored her activity. Every time she left the house, I checked her location, half expecting to see her heading to Jake's. But nothing happened. She went about her day like normal, running errands, picking up the kids, everything seemed ordinary. I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for everything, and I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. But then, around 4 p.m., the app pinged. She was at Jake's house. My heart started pounding in my chest. There it was, clear as day, her location, sitting in front of Jake's house, and she hadn't mentioned anything about going over there. I stared at the screen, trying to figure out what to do. Should I confront her now? Drive over there and catch them? Or wait it out and see what happens? I decided to wait. If I rushed over, I'd look desperate, and I still didn't have concrete evidence of what was going on inside that house. But the thought of her being there, with him, made my blood boil. I sat on the couch, unable to focus on anything else, just watching the little dot on my phone screen that represented my wife. After what felt like an eternity, she finally left Jake's and came home, acting like nothing was out of the ordinary. She greeted me with the usual smile, kissed me on the cheek, and went on about her evening like everything was fine. But I couldn't hide my suspicion any longer. Every word out of her mouth felt like a lie, and I could barely look her in the eye without my stomach turning. The next few days passed in a blur of tension and quiet resentment. I didn't know how to confront her, what to say, what to ask. I wanted to scream at her, ask her why she was doing this, how long it had been going on, but I kept it all bottled up, waiting for the right moment. I didn't want to accuse her without undeniable proof. I needed something she couldn't talk her way out of. Then, one evening, it all came crashing down. Lisa was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I glanced at it, half expecting a message from one of her friends or the kids' school, but what I saw made my blood run cold. It was a text from Jake, and it wasn't anything innocent. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you again. Last time was amazing." I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. My hands trembled as I picked up her phone and unlocked it, scrolling through the messages. Sure enough, there it was, a full thread of deleted texts, somehow restored. They had been meeting behind my back for weeks, maybe longer, and from the looks of it, it wasn't just emotional. I stood there, phone in hand, my heart pounding in my ears as I read through each sickening message. Every word was like a dagger to the chest. They weren't just meeting up, they had crossed every line imaginable. By the time Lisa came out of the shower, I was shaking with rage. She saw me standing there, her phone in my hand, and the color drained from her face. "What's this?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Her eyes widened in panic, darting to the phone and back to me. She knew there was no escaping it now. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. That night, everything would change. But the worst part was yet to come. Lisa froze when she saw me standing there with her phone in hand, the glow of the screen casting a shadow over her face. She must have known, in that moment, that everything was about to come crashing down. There was no way to lie her way out of this one. I had seen the texts, the confirmation of everything I had been dreading. "What's this?" I asked again, holding up her phone, my voice as steady as I could manage. But inside, I was a storm, anger, hurt, betrayal all swirling together, threatening to tear me apart. Lisa's eyes darted to the phone, then back to me. She didn't speak for a moment, her mouth opening and closing as if she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Her silence was deafening. "Last time was amazing?" I repeated, my voice cracking as I read the message from Jake aloud. "You've been meeting him behind my back?" My own brother? She started to shake her head, but I wasn't having any of it. Don't lie to me, Lisa. I've seen everything. I've known for weeks. Just tell me the truth for once. Tears filled her eyes as she finally spoke. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen, You didn't mean for this to happen? I snapped, cutting her off. How long has this been going on? How long have you been sneaking around with Jake? She swallowed hard, her hands trembling. It started a few months ago. After Jake and Marie broke up, I went to check on him, and things just happened. I didn't plan it, I swear. Things just happened? My voice rose as I repeated her pathetic excuse, the anger I'd been bottling up for so long finally boiling over. You don't accidentally have an affair, Lisa. You don't accidentally destroy your marriage and betray your husband with his own brother. Tears streamed down her face now, and she reached out to me, but I stepped back, disgusted by her touch. Please, it didn't mean anything. It's not what you think. Not what I think. I laughed bitterly, unable to believe what I was hearing. Then explain it to me. Explain how meeting my brother, sneaking around behind my back, and lying to my face is anything other than exactly what I think it is. She didn't answer. She just stood there, sobbing, her hands covering her face as if that would somehow make all of this go away. But it wasn't going away. It was real, and it was tearing me apart. I couldn't stand to look at her anymore. I turned and stormed out of the kitchen, heading for the front door, desperate for some air, for a space, for anything that would help me breathe again. But just as I reached for the door, I heard Ryan's voice behind me. Dad? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. I stopped in my tracks, my heart sinking. I hadn't even thought about the boys. How was I going to explain this to them? How was I supposed to tell them that their mom had betrayed me, that their uncle was involved? This nightmare wasn't just mine to bear, it was about to tear our whole family apart. I turned to face Ryan, who stood at the top of the stairs, his eyes wide with confusion. What's going on? He asked, glancing between me and Lisa, who had appeared in the hallway, still crying. Go back to your room, Ryan, I said, my voice thick with emotion. This is between your mom and me. But Ryan didn't move. Is everything okay? You guys are yelling and… I don't understand. Lisa stepped forward, wiping her tears. Ryan, it's fine. Everything's fine, sweetie. Just go upstairs. But he wasn't buying it. No, it's not fine, he said, his voice rising. I heard you, Mom. I know what you did. I saw your car at Uncle Jake's house. I told Dad weeks ago. My heart dropped into my stomach. He knew. He had known all along, and now he was putting the pieces together. The look of horror on Lisa's face said it all. There was no hiding from the truth anymore. Ryan! Lisa started, but he cut her off, his face twisting with anger and hurt. How could you do that to Dad? He demanded, his voice breaking. How could you lie to us like that? How could you, with Uncle Jake? Lisa's sobs grew louder, but Ryan wasn't done. You said you loved Dad. You said we were a family. Was that all a lie too? Ryan, please, Lisa begged, reaching out to him. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you or your dad. But Ryan stepped back, just like I had. I can't believe you, he whispered, shaking his head. You ruined everything. His words cut through me like a knife, because they were true. She had ruined everything, our family, our marriage, our trust. And now, our son was caught in the middle of this disaster, watching his parents fall apart. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, needing to escape before I said or did something I couldn't take back. I'm going out, I muttered, not waiting for a response. I slammed the door behind me and got into the car, my hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there. Not with her. Not with the betrayal suffocating me. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Every thought was consumed by Lisa and Jake, by their lies, by the pain that was ripping me apart. I wanted to confront Jake, to tear him apart for what he'd done. But more than that, I wanted to understand why. Why would my brother betray me like this? Why would my wife? Eventually, I pulled into a parking lot and just sat there, staring at nothing, my mind numb. How was I supposed to go back? How was I supposed to face Lisa again, to face Jake, to pick up the shattered pieces of my life? But I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had 2 sons who needed answers, who needed stability. I had a family, even if it felt like it had been blown apart. I had to figure out what to do next, but the thought of making any decisions right now felt impossible. I checked my phone. Missed calls and texts from Lisa filled the screen, all apologetic, all desperate for me to come back and talk. But I didn't have the energy. Not now. I needed time. I needed space. And I needed to decide whether our marriage, our family, could survive this, or if it was already too late. I spent hours in that parking lot, just sitting in the dark, the glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the empty asphalt. I must have read Lisa's texts a dozen times, each one more desperate than the last. Please come home. We need to talk. I'm so sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. I love you, please don't leave us. Just come back and we'll figure this out. I can't do this without you. But every word only fueled the anger burning inside me. How could she say she loved me when she had betrayed me so completely? I had always believed in our marriage, believed in us, but now it felt like none of it had been real. Every memory, every moment we shared, felt tainted by her affair. I couldn't bring myself to respond. Not yet. I don't know how long I stayed there, but at some point, I realized I couldn't avoid it forever. Eventually, I would have to go home, face Lisa, face the wreckage she had left behind. And more than anything, I had to figure out how to explain this mess to our boys. Ryan already knew more than I wanted him to, but Josh, our youngest, was blissfully unaware. He was too young to understand, but sooner or later, I'd have to tell him something. My heart ached just thinking about it. I drove back home in a daze, the streets blurring together as my thoughts raced. What was I going to say? How was I going to confront her again, now that there was no turning back? I couldn't just walk through the door and pretend everything was fine. It wasn't fine. It was shattered. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the dim glow of the living room light. I sat in the car for a few minutes, trying to steel myself for what was coming. My hands were still shaking as I turned off the engine and stepped out into the cool night air. The door creaked as I stepped inside, and I was greeted by silence. Lisa was sitting on the couch, her face pale and streaked with dried tears. She didn't say anything at first, just looked up at me with those wide, pleading eyes. I could see the regret there, the fear. But it wasn't enough. "You're back," she whispered, as if she couldn't quite believe it. I closed the door behind me, the click of the lock echoing in the stillness. I didn't respond, just stood there, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. "Where were you?" she asked softly, her voice fragile, as if she was afraid to push too hard. "Does it matter?" I finally said, my voice cold. She winced, her eyes filling with fresh tears. I've been trying to explain, but you didn't answer my calls. I thought you wouldn't come back." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue, waiting for her to explain how any of this made sense. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, wiping at her tears. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you or the boys." "Then why?" I snapped, my voice louder than I intended. "Why, Lisa? Why would you throw everything away? Was it worth it? Was he worth it?" She flinched at the mention of Jake, and for a moment, she didn't respond. The silence was unbearable. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to be pushed over. "It wasn't about Jake," she finally said, her voice trembling. "It was never about him. It was me. I felt like I was losing myself. Everything was always about the kids, about the house, about keeping things together. I didn't know who I was anymore, and Jake, he was there. He was familiar, and I made a mistake. A terrible, awful mistake. I shook my head, my chest tightening. That's not an excuse, Lisa. You could have talked to me. You didn't have to, this. I know, she cried, her voice breaking. I know I should have, but I didn't. I was selfish, and I thought I could handle it, that I could stop before it got worse. But I didn't, and now I've ruined everything. Her sobs filled the room, but they did nothing to ease the pain. The words, "I've ruined everything," rang in my head, and it struck me how painfully true they were. She hadn't just ruined our marriage, she had destroyed our family, our trust. And Jake, how was I supposed to face him again, knowing he'd been complicit in all of this? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. How long? I asked, my voice hoarse. Lisa looked up at me, her face pale. It's been a few months. After Halloween, it just got worse. My heart sank. Halloween, that night when everything fell off, when she was unusually eager to see Jake. It had started then. And I'd ignored all the signs, convincing myself it was nothing. Did it ever mean anything? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her eyes widened, and she shook her head violently. No, it didn't mean anything. I swear. I never loved him. I never wanted to leave you. It was just... She stopped, struggling to find the words. It was a mistake, a stupid, selfish mistake. The anger surged inside me again. A mistake? I spat. This wasn't a mistake, Lisa. This was a choice. You chose to betray me. You chose to lie. And Jake, my own brother, he went along with it. She sobbed harder, but I felt numb, the weight of her words crashing down on me. The betrayal was too deep, too raw. I didn't know how we could come back from this. I'll do anything, she whispered through her tears. Anything to fix this, to make it right. I love you. I don't want to lose you. But I wasn't sure if there was anything left to fix. I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again, knowing what she had done. The damage had been done, and there was no undoing it. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. I don't know if I can forgive you. She sobbed harder, her face buried in her hands, but I didn't feel any sympathy. I was too broken, too numb. I'll go, she said, her voice muffled. If that's what you want, I'll leave. But please think about the boys. They need their family. We can't break it apart. I let out a bitter laugh. You already broke it, Lisa. You did this. She flinched, but didn't argue. She knew I was right. I need time, I finally said, the words feeling heavy. I don't know what happens next, but I can't deal with this right now. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. Okay, she whispered. I'll give you whatever time you need. I turned away, heading for the stairs, my head spinning with everything I'd just heard. I didn't know what I was going to do, if I could ever forgive her, if I could stay, or if this was the end. But one thing was clear, nothing would ever be the same again. As I climbed the stairs, I heard her sobs echoing through the house, but I didn't turn back. I couldn't. Not yet. The next morning, the house felt eerily quiet. Lisa had slept on the couch, though I barely slept at all. My mind kept replaying everything she had said, every lie, every betrayal. I couldn't escape it, not even in the dark silence of our bedroom. It felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. When I finally dragged myself downstairs, Lisa was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee in front of her. She looked exhausted, her eyes puffy and red from crying. But she didn't say anything when I entered, just watched me with a mixture of hope and fear, like she was waiting for me to explode. I didn't. I had no energy left for anger. I was drained, numb. The boys were still asleep, and the house felt fragile, like the slightest wrong word would shatter it completely. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to act like everything wasn't falling apart around us. I hadn't decided what to do, hadn't figured out whether I could even look at Lisa without seeing her betrayal. But the kids, Ryan and Josh, They were all I could think about now. How were they going to handle this? How was I going to explain any of this to them? Have you thought about what I said? Lisa asked quietly, breaking the silence. Her voice was tentative, like she was afraid of setting me off. I didn't look at her. I haven't thought about anything else, I said flatly, taking a sip of my coffee. The bitterness of it matched the heaviness in my chest. Lisa nodded, looking down at her cup. I can stay with my sister for a while. Give you space. I don't want to make things harder for you. I let out a hollow laugh. You should have thought about that before you slept with Jake. Her face crumpled, but she didn't argue. There was no point in arguing anymore. I'm not asking for forgiveness, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve it. But I can't lose you. I can't lose our family. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for years, the mother of my children, and I couldn't recognize her. This wasn't the same person I had built a life with. She had made choices that ripped apart everything we had, and now she was asking for a chance to put it back together. How do you expect me to just forget this? I asked, my voice raw with emotion. You lied to me. You betrayed me, with my own brother. How am I supposed to get past that? She didn't answer right away, her hands trembling as she held her coffee. I don't expect you to forget. I don't expect anything. But I want to try. I want to make this right. I shook my head. It's not that simple, Lisa. You broke everything. I don't even know who you are anymore. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but she wiped them away quickly. I know. I know I did this, and I'm sorry. I can't undo what happened, but I can try to fix it. For us. For the kids. The kids. That was the only thing that kept me from walking out right then and there. Ryan and Josh, they didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to watch their family fall apart, especially over something as ugly as this. I don't even know if I want to fix it, I said, my voice breaking. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Lisa sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking, but she didn't argue. She knew I was right. We sat in silence for what felt like forever, the weight of everything between us suffocating. I didn't know what to do. Every part of me wanted to scream, to rage, to demand answers, but at the same time, I felt too exhausted to even start. Suddenly, footsteps came from the stairs, and Ryan appeared in the doorway, his eyes darting between us. He looked hesitant, as if he had walked into the aftermath of a bomb going off, and in a way, he had. Morning, he muttered, clearly sensing the tension. Where's Josh? Lisa wiped at her eyes, trying to compose herself. Still asleep, she said, her voice shaky. Ryan lingered in the doorway, his eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at us. I could tell he knew something was wrong, something bigger than he had realized the night before. I didn't know how much he had overheard, but I knew we couldn't hide the truth from him forever. He had already seen Lisa's car at Jake's. He had heard enough to understand that something was deeply wrong. But I wasn't ready to explain it yet. Not to him. Not to Josh. Not until I figured out what the hell I was going to do. Ryan grabbed some cereal from the pantry and sat down at the table, eating quietly while Lisa and I continued our silent standoff. Every now and then, he'd glance up at me, his expression full of questions, but he didn't ask. He just kept his head down, clearly uneasy. After a while, Josh came bounding down the stairs, his usual energy filling the room, oblivious to the tension between the three of us. He went straight for the fridge, chatting about some video game he'd been playing, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. I envied him, in a way. I envied the innocence of not knowing, not understanding the pain that was hanging over this house like a dark cloud. But I knew it wouldn't last. Sooner or later, he'd have to know. We couldn't hide this forever. As the day went on, I found myself avoiding Lisa as much as possible. I stayed in my office, pretending to work, but all I could think about was the decision looming over me. Stay and try to fix this for the kids? Or leave and accept that our marriage was over? The thought of leaving, of breaking up our family, tore me apart. but staying felt like a betrayal of myself. How could I live with someone who had done this to me? How could I ever trust her again? By the time evening came, the weight of it all had become unbearable. I couldn't take the silence, the pretending. I had to confront Jake. I had to hear it from him, to look him in the eye and demand answers. This wasn't just about Lisa anymore. My brother had betrayed me too, and I couldn't let that go without facing him. "I'm going out," I told Lisa, standing by the front door, my keys in hand. She looked up from the couch, her face filled with dread. "Where are you going?" "To see Jake," I said, my voice flat. "We need to talk." Lisa stood up, panic flashing across her face. "Please don't," she begged. "It'll only make things worse." I shook my head, my mind made up. "I need to do this. I need to hear it from him." She didn't say anything else, just watched helplessly as I walked out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I knew I couldn't avoid this any longer. When I pulled up to Jake's house, his truck was in the driveway, the same truck that had once symbolized brotherhood and memories. Now, it was just a reminder of his betrayal. I got out of the car and stood there for a moment, gathering my thoughts. Then, without hesitating, I walked up to the door and knocked. I wasn't sure if I was more angry or heartbroken, but I knew one thing for sure: I was done being in the dark. After a few seconds, the door swung open, and there he was, Jake, my brother, the man who had helped me through so many of life's challenges. But now, when I looked at him, all I saw was a traitor. He looked surprised to see me, but that look quickly shifted to something else: guilt. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice cold and steady. Jake stepped aside, letting me in without a word. This was it. The moment everything came to a head. Stepping into Jake's house, I felt the air shift, heavy with tension. The place was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that made every breath feel like it was too loud. As I walked in, I noticed that Jake avoided looking me in the eye, his hands stuffed into his pockets. "Sit down," he muttered, gesturing toward the couch. But I couldn't sit. Not here. Not with him. Not after everything I had discovered. I crossed my arms, standing my ground in the middle of his living room. My pulse was racing, the anger I had been holding back for days now boiling to the surface. "We're past small talk, Jake," I said, my voice low, vibrating with barely restrained fury. "You know why I'm here." Jake's face tightened, and for a brief moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes: regret, maybe shame, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He let out a long breath and finally met my gaze. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice softer than I expected. "But I'm not going to lie to you. You deserve the truth." "The truth?" I repeated, incredulous. "The truth, Jake? You've been lying to me for months. Both of you. Don't talk to me about the truth like you care." He flinched at my words, and part of me was glad to see it. I wanted him to feel the pain he had caused, to feel just a fraction of what I had been going through since the moment I realized what had been happening behind my back. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said quietly. "I swear, it wasn't planned." "Spare me the excuses," I shot back. "I've heard enough of them from Lisa. Just tell me, how long?" Jake's shoulders slumped, and he looked away again, like he couldn't bear to face me. "It started after Marie left," he admitted. "I was a mess, and Lisa came over to check on me. It was innocent at first, just talking. But then, it got out of hand." I could barely breathe as I processed his words. "How long, Jake?" I demanded, my voice rising. "How long have you been sneaking around with my wife?" "A few months," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since around Halloween." "Halloween." Of course. That night when everything felt wrong, when Lisa seemed too eager to be here, too comfortable in Jake's presence. I should have known. I did know on some level, but I hadn't wanted to believe it. I had ignored all the signs, hoping that I was just being paranoid. "And it wasn't just emotional, was it?" I asked bitterly, already knowing the answer. Jake hesitated, then shook his head. No. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut, knocking the air from my lungs. Hearing him admit it made it real in a way that nothing else had. This wasn't just some emotional connection or harmless flirting. They had crossed every line. Betrayed every bond. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep control of the rage building inside me. How could you do this to me? You're my brother, Jake. We've been through everything together, and you… I know! He interrupted, his voice suddenly breaking, raw with guilt. I know what I did, okay. I know I screwed up. I've been hating myself every day for it, but I didn't know how to stop. It just happened. Don't give me that it just happened crap. I growled, stepping toward him. You made choices. Both of you. You had chances to stop, to end it, but you didn't. You kept lying to me. You kept betraying me. 4 months. Jake ran a hand through his hair, his face pale and strained. You're right. I don't have an excuse. I can't take it back. But it wasn't. He stopped, struggling for words. It wasn't about hurting you. I let out a bitter laugh. Not about hurting me? Then what the hell was it about, Jake? Because from where I'm standing, that's all it looks like. He winced but didn't argue. He couldn't. There was nothing he could say to make this better. Nothing that could change what he had done. I was in a bad place, he finally said, his voice hollow. Marie had just left, and I wasn't thinking straight. Lisa came around, and she was there for me. It got blurry. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I wasn't myself. I don't care what place you were in. I snapped. You knew what you were doing every time you saw her. You didn't just wake up one day and accidentally sleep with her. You chose this, Jake. You chose to betray me. He was silent for a long moment, his jaw clenched, his eyes full of guilt. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. But I did. And I'll never forgive myself for that. Forgive yourself? I repeated, my voice rising. You don't get to forgive yourself, Jake. Not for this. You don't get to walk away and pretend like everything's okay just because you feel bad about it now. He hung his head, the weight of my words settling over him like a heavy cloak. I know, he whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in the rage that was threatening to overwhelm me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, Jake, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. You've destroyed everything. Our relationship. My marriage. My family. How am I supposed to move on from that? He didn't have an answer. He just stood there, looking at me with that same guilty expression, as if he was waiting for me to say something, anything, that would make it easier for him. But there was nothing to say. Nothing that could undo the damage he had caused. I thought I could trust you, I said, my voice breaking. I thought you were my brother. I am your brother, he said quietly, but the words felt empty. Not anymore, I replied, the finality of it hanging in the air between us. Jake flinched, but he didn't argue. He knew there was no coming back from this. No way to repair the broken bond between us. I turned away, unable to look at him any longer. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal, it was all too much. I needed to get out of there before I lost control. Before I said or did something I couldn't take back. Don't call me. Don't come near me. And stay the hell away from my family, I said, my voice cold, final. Jake didn't respond. He just stood there, silent, as I walked out the door, my heart pounding in my chest. When I got back into the car, I sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had thought that confronting Jake would give me some sense of closure, some clarity about what had happened, but it didn't. It just left me feeling hollow, more lost than ever. As I drove away from his house, the weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating. My marriage was in shambles, my brother had betrayed me, and I had no idea what to do next. I was driving aimlessly, trying to clear my head, when my phone buzzed. I glanced down at the screen and saw Lisa's name. She had texted me again, asking where I was, if I was okay, if I was coming home. I ignored it. Home. The word didn't feel right anymore. Not after everything that had happened. The place I had once thought of as my sanctuary, my safe haven, now felt like the last place I wanted to be. But I had to go back. For the kids. They were innocent in all of this, and they didn't deserve to suffer for the choices their mother and uncle had made. So I turned the car around and headed home, though it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I was obligated to go, a place I had to face. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was quiet. Lisa was sitting in the living room, waiting for me, her face pale and tear-streaked. She stood up when she saw me, her eyes searching mine for some sign of what had happened with Jake. I didn't say anything as I walked past her, heading straight for the stairs. I needed space. I needed time. I needed to figure out how to navigate the wreckage of my life. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, my back to her. "No," I said, my voice flat. "But I will be." With that, I went upstairs, leaving her standing alone in the living room, the silence between us heavier than ever. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with more questions than answers. But one thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.